Hello again, friends. I know it's been a while. Time for another In Other News holiday edition. Hope everybody's enjoying the Thanksgiving break and you're eating lots of good turkey or drinking lots of turkey or whatever it is you do with turkey. And there's been a whole lot of news. There's actually been so much great news, interesting news, fascinating and important news worldwide. I've been overwhelmed of what story to even pick. But this one really jumped out at me within the last 48 hours, and I had to share it with any plaid peeps who are still tuning into this site and are interested in this stuff. And that is that there's really a battle of the Pacific blocks is underway. I mean, this game is on. And it's a battle of trade blocks that's actually indicative of something much bigger. And it's really a kind of Asia versus America-led world. And that's why it's so important. We'll call this one Battle of the Pacific Blocks. And it's on. And now let me talk about specifically what I'm referencing. And that is, there's been all sorts of action happening in the last 2 weeks in Southeast Asia and environs. That is the kind of Pacific Rim over on the Asia side. It's called the Ring of Fire, and it has been, usually for volcanoes, but it has been on fire with political and economic activity like almost never before, just in the last couple weeks. Truly, it is now becoming obvious that Asia in general, but actually I say Southeast Asia, is becoming this kind of critical linchpin of action for a whole lot of economic and political things going on planet Earth. What am I talking about? Things have been on fire in Southeast Asia. Let me reference a few things that have been going on. And if you want a specific podcast just on one of these things, hit me up, because all of them fascinate me so much I can't decide what specifically to talk about. Just in the last couple weeks. I don't know if you noticed. I know if you're in class, you heard me reference this. But virtually all important American leaders have been partying in Southeast Asia in the last 14 days. All of them, from the president on down. I reported on in class that the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, and the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, both were in Western Australia at the same time, about 10 days ago, to talk with government leaders in Western Australia and the federal government about putting in a bunch of, or a few, military installations that were for space-based projects in Australia. So U.S. space program stations going on in Australia. They, of course, were also probably talking about the U.S. military installations going in Northern Australia. And then that was followed up a few days later by President Barack Obama going there and partying. On his way, as soon as he won the election, I don't know if you noticed, he jumped out of the country and has been on an Asian tour ever since. Australia, party with Julia Gillard, then went into Southeast Asia for the ASEAN meeting. Before he even went to the ASEAN and EAS meeting, he partied with Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma. First time ever a U.S. president has been to the country of Burma. Ever! That's pretty exciting news in and of itself. Met with Aung San Suu Kyi. Woo! Pro-democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi! Then met with the president of the country, former military kind of dictatorish dude, Thein Sein, the president of Burma. And the U.S. is reestablishing relations, political and economic, with Burma, just like that. That's big news. Then Obama goes on, and Hillary Clinton was there too, to the ASEAN meeting, the ASEAN trade bloc, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, a trade bloc I have for years has said to watch. I've been begging people to watch it because it is becoming a linchpin of all economic activity in Asia. Yeah, I know. China rich, China rich, China rich. China's richest country ever. Blah, 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 blah. Yes, but they're not alone. And even China, once part of the ASEAN action, and ASEAN, as I keep suggesting, is now becoming kind of an epicenter for a bigger regional trade bloc, if not a couple of different regional trade blocs. And China wants in on that action. Yes, China is the gargantuan, the mammoth, the woolly mammoth in the room, all right? The 800-pound Chinese gorilla in the room. That's their economy, but they're not going to sit on their haunches and just have everything kind of work itself out and things kind of unfold, and they don't have to care because they're so big, which, by the way, is usually the American attitude. China's being very kind of proactive, saying, no. let's increase our trade presence around our vicinity. Let's tie ourselves together more with our surrounding trade partners in our area. And ASEAN is the perfect vehicle for that. So China's all about ASEAN, and they're about ASEAN growing in a Asian direction, not a U.S. Western direction. And that's why I think this story is such a big deal, of this battle of the Pacific trade blocks. Okay, now I can get to it. What am I talking about? The ASEAN meeting went down, and ASEAN and friends, I'll call it, because for the second year, it's been ASEAN, China, Japan, Australia, I think, India maybe, and the U.S. and Russia. So, again, at the ASEAN meeting. So everybody, this is ASEAN and friends, everybody realizes, everybody wants to do more business here. It's no coincidence that Barack Obama decided to go to ASEAN at this time, to go to Southeast Asia to meet with Burma for the first time ever. All of this is part of a bigger drama unfolding of how is the U.S. going to stay active in this area? How can the U.S. fight to be an influential partner with all of these Asian countries? And it is a fight that I think is intentional to make sure the U.S. doesn't get pushed out as China pushes in and takes over the whole thing. So China's interest is, of course, that they want to flex their muscle and their influence in the region via ASEAN and extended trade ties. And the U.S. doesn't want to get left out, so the U.S. is in there fighting for influence and extended trade ties with ASEAN and everybody else. So the ASEAN meeting unfolds, and it's all chill. They actually put the China-Japan island conflict on the back burner. They said they're not even going to discuss that. It was mostly about trade and blah, 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 and this and that and the other, and extending the influence and the ties of the trade bloc with its partner, within itself, but also its partner members that I've now mentioned. And that folded directly into the EAS meeting. Bam! For those of you that immediately know what I'm talking about, you're so smart, because we talked about this stuff back in class. The EAS is the East Asian Summit. And that's the ASEAN bloc, the core, the hinge pin, like I keep saying, or the hinge linchpin, like I keep saying, the ASEAN core plus China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, India. Bam! This is a Superman, Super Goliath kind of forming up trade bloc, and that's one of the things they talked about, and that's what's caught my eye for this rage today. After the East Asia Summit, oh, by the way, the United States was at the East Asia Summit. I believe Russia was there, that one too. So again, ASEAN and the EAS is kind of almost starting to blend into one, but the ASEAN core is still that 10-member countries, those 10 states of Southeast Asia, that are doing the most to integrate themselves together politically and economically. But they're the core for this bigger EAS. And all of the major players were there, and Obama was there, Hillary Clinton was there, and I'm sure the leaders of China, I'm pretty sure Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao got out of their Commie Party meeting up in China and went down to this meeting as well. So everybody's trying to make sure they're represented in this growing EAS grouping. And it's a really new grouping. It's only gotten together a few times. That's why it's so critically important. So that meeting went down, everything's chill, ASEAN went down, EAS went down. Here's the interesting part. At the tail end of the EAS, and I'm thinking that China was the biggest pusher of this, but I can't swear to it. I don't know. ASEAN, the ASEAN grouping is the one that brought it up. But at the tail end of the East Asia Summit, of which I'm sure they talked about security and economics and defense and all this other stuff, somebody brought up that, hey, we're going to form up something called the RCEP. Now, this is a very unsexy acronym. It sucks. They need to think of a better name and a better acronym. But the RCEP, this is brand new. First time I've ever even heard of this, folks, and I'm telling you, it's important to know. The RCEP is called, its official title, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Okay? That's a mouthful of blah. So why would I think it's important enough and get me excited enough to do a podcast here before Thanksgiving? Oh, just this. Because this is now at the heart of the battle of the Pacific trade blocs for the heart and soul of Asia and beyond. This Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is going to consist of the ASEAN core, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, possibly New Zealand, and India. And what they want to form is a gigantic trade bloc, a gigantic free trade zone. This would be 16 countries, and it would be the largest trade bloc ever in the history of planet Earth, both in the size of the population involved, which will have to be, I don't know this number exactly off the top of my head, but just thinking of India, China, and the countries in between, this has to be about 3.5 billion people would be in a single trade bloc. It would constitute something on the order of $20 trillion a year in GDP, which would be the largest block of GDP ever. And that's yearly GDP of how much trade is going on between these countries. So you're looking at a brand new, gigantic animal that no one really saw coming. Now, why would I suggest this is Battle of the Pacific trade blocks, and why is it important for the United States? The U.S. is pissed about this. The U.S. cannot be happy about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that was brought up at the end of this EAS meeting. They have to be furious about it. Why? Because of the countries I listed that would be in this RCEP, who did I leave out? If you instinctively said, hey, Boyer didn't mention the U.S., you are correct. The U.S. would not be in the most gigantic free trade zone of all time. Neither would any of the Europeans. Who cares about them? They're on the other side of the planet. So this is a really big deal in my mind, because here's what I see. And sorry, I was going to make this quick, so I'll try to wrap it up. This is what I see, and here why I had an epiphany when I saw this news story. This, I believe, is being intentionally set up and probably heavily sponsored by China. However, other U.S. allies are wanting to jump in this too, including Australia, Japan, and India. They're all three going, hell yeah, we'll sign up for this RCEP, largest trade bloc ever, free trade zone. Hell, we're all going to get richer. So everybody's excited about it, but it excludes the United States. And the epiphany I had suddenly was, OMG, how did I not see this coming? Because what is the other trade bloc that old Boyer has been telling you about? That the U.S. has been pushing hard to get rammed through all of the member states as quickly as possible. Do you remember that little thing I've taught about in other podcasts called the TPP? The Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, go look that up, go Google it, or go look at old podcasts. That was one that the U.S. has been just charged up and pushing down people's throats to do for about the last 2 years. And even it was new. The reason I was excited about the TPP, because it's a brand new trade bloc. And even then I was like, wow, the U.S. is really hustling on this. The Obama administration has been whining and dining and wheeling and dealing with all of these countries to jump onto the TPP. Now, and by the way, 5 years ago, there was no such thing as a TPP. It was like 3 countries. I think it was Mexico, New Zealand, and Brunei that were setting up this free trade pact called the TPP. Nobody gave a shit about it. It didn't include any major players. Suddenly, about 3 years ago, the United States saw this, picked up the ball, and said, oh, we should expand this. The TPP should be all the major economies of the Pacific. It should be U.S., Canada, Mexico, Chile, maybe Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, all our rich friends, and all the ASEAN. Let's get as many ASEAN countries as we can in the TPP and set up a big Pacific free trade zone. Yes, awesome, sweet. Hey, what did the TPP exclude? What country was left out of the TPP? China was. Bam! That's the epiphany. I got it. It all came together. I'm like, oh my. I cannot have just figured that one out. I'm not that clever. But now it's in our face because of this RCEP. Now we have a battle of the Pacific trade blocks on. One that includes China, and China's pushing for. That's this big one that will become the biggest of all time that I think is likely to go through. Versus the TPP, which the U.S. is sponsoring, that excludes China. So RCEP, sponsored by China, excludes U.S. TPP, sponsored by U.S., excludes China. This game is on. to end, who do I think is going to win this fight? I think RCEP is going to win it. I will do a whole podcast about this if people really are intrigued and interested. But one of the reasons that the TPP is not likely to go, even though the Obama administration has been ramming it down people's throats, is because the U.S. is trying to lock in all of U.S. law and all U.S. copyright infringement, medical copyright, medical patents. They're trying to ensure that all U.S. companies get their way with the rest of planet Earth. Now, I know that seems like I'm some sort of crazy liberal commie pinko nutbag, but I'll talk more about it later if you want, but it's the main reason why many countries are hesitant to jump in the TPP. And on the other side of the Pacific, the RCEP, they're just saying, oh, hell no, we're not talking about any of that shit. We're not talking about common law. We're not talking about copyrights. We're not talking about trade infringement. We are simply talking about free trade. Good old-fashioned free trade, liberal trade zone. That is going to get the interest and probably get passed through all of the prospective countries in Asia that are, quite frankly, are doing way better economically right now than Europe or America and have it in their vested interest to trade more with each other because they're the hot economies. And again, list off some of the hot ones. South Korea on fire, China on fire, Vietnam on fire, Indonesia on fire, India, they got a flame. Australia on fire, New Zealand doing well. Most of the Asian economies, though much poorer overall, GDP-wise, are growing. So this is the epicenter of economic action. And of course, all of these players, everybody in the hood, even Japan, a U.S. ally, is like, yeah, we want to kind of be part of that. We don't want to get left out of that party. So watch for the RCEP. Hopefully they're going to rename it something cooler and easier to remember. But definitely dig this. This battle, not for supremacy, that's too hard of a word. This battle for influence in Asia is on. And the battle is manifesting itself economically in this RCEP versus TPP. An Asian-centered bloc versus a U.S., I don't say U.S.-centered, a U.S.-influenced bloc. And the U.S., I'm afraid, is likely to get left out in the Pacific cold on this one unless they change their TPP ways and somehow convince a lot of their allies to not join the RCEP, which I doubt. You got any questions or comments or concerns about this particular podcast? I think it's a really huge, big deal. I think there's all this action going on in Southeast Asia in particular, but the Asian crescent altogether, that is of vital interest to everyone in the United States, and you should be as excited and fired up and know about this stuff as I am. So hit me up if you want a podcast about any component of this or something else going on in the world, because there's lots of stuff going on. Otherwise, happy Thanksgiving. See you on the other side of Turkey Day. Party on!